Welcome to the Frontline Man podcast. My name is Mark Queppet, and I'm a Christian family man, and I've been a professional men's coach since 2013, where I've focused on helping guys eliminate escapism like pornography, scrolling, gaming, etc., and optimize their productivity and relationships. And today I am joined by guest Timothy Regal. So thank you so much for being here today, Tim. Why don't you tell everybody, who you are and kind of what you're about?
Absolutely, man. Glad to be joining you. So I'm a coach as well. I specialize specifically on porn and sex addiction. So after overcoming my own 15 plus year battle with porn, with affairs and sexual infidelity, Lord brought me through that and now kind of gave me the message and the mission to turn around and help other men through that. So I've been doing that for a little over 5 years now.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. I'm interested to get kind of your story around this too, because it sounds like you've really gone through the ringer with this stuff. So, tell me, what did this look like for you? Where'd you start? What happened? And how'd you end up here?
Well, it started kind of relatively innocently, really. Kind of just a curious, hormonal teenage boy, and I'm 38, sure. So I kind of started coming up in the age of late 90s, early 2000s. And it was kind of the whole purity culture thing was big back then in the church, mm-hmm. right? And my dad was a pastor. I grew up at a pastor's home.
Pastor's son archetype.
Yeah, the PK, the rebellious PK vibe that you got to worry about, right? But sex was never really talked about, right? It was only talked about as you have to wait for marriage. And like I said, the purity culture was big. The big three were don't drink, don't smoke, don't have sex. Right? Mm-hmm. And when you're a teenage boy, a curious teenage boy, a little rebellious, right? What do you think the three things you want to do most are? Right? And so I stumbled upon porn kind of just innocently, just teenage curiosity. But I was hooked from the minute I saw it. And it was just like, this was this horrible thing that, you're going to hell, and it was always just this forbidden fruit. Right. Mm-hmm. And I discovered this and I was like, this is awesome. This is exciting. This is thrilling. This feels great, and all of that. And so I was just kind of hooked. And as I got older,
And let me pause you right there,
sure.
Because I think there's something really powerful there that the Christian community tends to miss, because, I was brought up Catholic, Catholic school
mm-hmm.
all the way, same kind of deal. Like, hey, this stuff's a mortal sin. You're going to go to hell for it.
Right.
And I tried to be a good boy as much as I could. And, I got into this stuff. And I remember one time, I think I was like a sophomore in high school, and I had gone 30 days without porn, and I was just going through it. I just felt like crap. I felt like depressed, irritable. I felt like I was going to explode. Mm-hmm. And I relapsed, and I felt so much better. I was like, oh, clearly my body needs this. Mm-hmm. And when I had that experience, I was like, these guys don't know what they're talking about. Clearly this is necessary for me, and they're full of it. And so the lack of the Christian community speaking specifically to that young man and helping him understand what's actually happening in his body when he uses this stuff, when he stays away from it. I didn't realize I was going through withdrawal
right
at the time. And so of course it felt good, but I didn't have any context for understanding that stuff. And I assume it was a similar sort of thing for you. You didn't get any guidance, right?
Yeah, there was no really teaching. It was just, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, don't do it, right? And there was no teaching that God designed sex to be a good thing, mm-hmm. right? And there's no teaching about what healthy sex looks like. Regardless of porn and stuff, there still really isn't great sexual education in the church, right? Of teaching
where does this part of me fit, right?
What
you have
does
this
a healthy
thing, it's
sex
put it
life
away
look like?
until you're or even just what do you do with it until you're 25 and you get married, right? What are you supposed to do with it? Right. And so it's of course guys are turning to porn.
Yeah, and there's no, what does a healthy sex life look like, right? And so even if people do remain abstinent until marriage, which they should, once they're in a marriage, there's still a shame attached to it, especially for a lot of women and young girls, mm-hmm. right? And so there's just none of this teaching on what we should teach, what a good sex life is first, and then be okay, but here are the dangers of it, right?
I agree.
And all it was just this legalistic, Bible bashing type of thing, and I think it did more harm than good and pushed more men, especially young men like me, to rebel than it did to compliance. Now, it was all well intentioned, right? We're promoting abstinence, we're promoting what Scripture says we need to do, but it was just done completely in the wrong way, and I think did more harm than good.
Yeah, 100%. And so, all right, you're a young guy, you fall into this stuff. What happens from there?
So as I got older, it just continued to get worse. It became more frequent. It got into more hardcore stuff. You know, it escalates. You know, porn's like any drug.
Of course.
You need more of it, and you need. But what's different about porn versus other drugs, alcohol, things like that, is that you don't just need more. You need different. You need new. It's always got to be something different. You don't watch the same 5-minute video over and over again, right? It's always got to be increasing. And so that's where the dangerous part happens, because eventually a 13-year-old that just Googles boobs, right, isn't enough, right? You gotta, it gets into more hardcore stuff, and it gets into extreme stuff, and then eventually it's live streams and chat rooms and texting, and you know, thank God OnlyFans didn't exist back then, or that had probably been an issue for me too. And then so that continued on through my later teen years, and then I'm a musician. I play in a lot of bands and stuff like that, and so it was kind of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll lifestyle. It's just part of it, right? And so, but then I got married pretty young. I was 21 when we got married, and kind of thought, again, okay, I'm married now. I don't have to worry about all this stuff, right? And again, I had no idea what a healthy marital sex life looked like, right? And so not only did it continue, it got worse once I was married, because now I'm dealing with all the stress of a family, kids, house, you know, all these type of things. And it eventually continued to escalate to where it made the jump over into physical stuff, to where I never really had a affair in the traditional sense, right? It wasn't like I was hooking up with a coworker or, you know, the proverbial, you know, sleeping with the secretary type of thing. There was never anything like that. It was all random online hookups, you know, dating sites, you know, once Tinder became a thing, all that type of stuff. And so that went on and off for the first almost 10 years of our marriage. And all this time, I always knew this was wrong deep down. There was never really a time where I thought it was okay or I maybe subconsciously tried to self-justify it, right? But deep in my heart, I always knew it was wrong. I was always convicted of the sin in my heart.
Right. And were you still pretty much a practicing Christian during all of this?
I mean, on the surface, right? You
Okay.
know, I mean, I would have considered myself a Christian at that time. I was active in church. I was playing music in church, and you know, you know, portrayed that, you know, picture perfect Christian image, right? But certainly wasn't the fruits weren't there, right? And I wasn't wasn't living accordingly. So, but yeah, I always had that inner conviction that this was wrong and I needed to stop. And I did all the things you were supposed to do, right? You know, I talked to my pastor. I went to counseling. I did Christian men's retreats. I did Bible studies. I read all the books. I did all the crap you're supposed to do, right? And it would work for a while, and then I'd eventually kind of slowly spiral back into it, right? And then each time it was worse, it got deeper, and each time I got better at not getting caught, right? And, you know, my wife and I actually separated for over a year at one point, and at that point...
So she knew this was going on?
Yeah, I'd gotten caught a bunch of times. She knew pretty much the whole time that it was going on.
Damn.
And like I said, I would get caught. I'd do the, you know, do my fair share of the things you're supposed to do, the Bible studies, the books, the counseling, all that. And like I said, it'd eventually roll back into it. I'd get good at it. And a year or two later, I'd get caught again, and we'd repeat that cycle. And we did that a bunch of times. At one point, she left, and I kind of had free reign for a while, right? There was no accountability. There was no risk of getting caught when she's not living with me. But eventually, you know, we agreed to get back together and make it go. And again, I did good for a while, but eventually went back to it. And so this continued on for almost 10 years in our marriage.
Damn. So you really went through it both personally and then also with your wife.
Right.
And are you still married to your wife?
Yep. So I'll get into a story of how I overcame everything, but after we
Yeah, like what was like the turning point and
so
whatnot? Yeah,
the
we'll
turning
go through
point
it step
really
by step.
was the last time I got caught. I didn't get caught by her. I got caught by my two best friends at the time, and they knew of everything, right? They were my accountability partners. They had supported me, encouraged me. You know, we were kind of best friends, and they caught me the last time, and kind of disowned me. In fact, I still haven't talked to them since. It's been almost 8-9 years now. And it was that kind of, for whatever reason, got through to me. And
Well, let me pause
Yeah.
on that piece. Like, do you have an idea of why you think that hit you harder?
I think it was more of it being well, first of all, I think it was the avenue that God chose to speak to me, right? But on a personal thing, I think it was more because it was my reputation in public. Because before, nobody had ever really known, right? It was between my wife and I, and pastor and a few trusted people, and to kind of have it exposed to the world, I think made a difference. Because we could still, my wife and I, even though things were terrible, we still,
Put on the face.
put on the happy face, right, and went to church, right, and so this kind of blew all that out of the water. So I think that was some of it as well, and which breaks my heart now, because I realize, it wasn't all the damage I did to my marriage and my family that got through to me. It was losing the guys that I, go out for a beer with, right, and so, but for whatever reason, that was that was kind of the turning point, and
Well, I think I just want to say something about that, because I think there's something powerful in there. I think there's like two pieces of it. Like, one is like when we have like a secret kind of problem like this, what I've found is that it's a lot easier to kind of compartmentalize things and to lie to yourself.
Sure.
Because like you can kind of just put your little filter on and be like, hey, it's not that big of a deal, at least when you're trying to act out, right? Because you're
Right.
able to ignore. It's like, oh, well, everything's still good on the surface. Everyone doesn't know this. But like once it's brought out into the public, you can't really play that game anymore. It's like you have to see it for what it actually is, right? And so you have these guys who are outside that little circle of you and your wife, and all of a sudden now you really have to think like, shit, what does this mean? What does this say about me? What does it say about what I do? And then also I think there's something powerful with just it being like that connection to other men. Like, this is why I don't think men can use their wives as their accountability partners, or like go to a female therapist. Like, there has to be some kind of connection to masculinity as a whole, as a social like layer of your reality, of a very important primal one.
Yeah.
And so like, what do you think of that?
No, I agree completely. And that was something I didn't have all those years, was a close brotherhood of men. And that's something I do have now. And I think has made all the difference. And that was some of what really helped me overcome it too. Because even though I got caught by these guys and it was a bigger deal, I probably would have continued, just kind of, I'd have gone through the motions of doing what I was supposed to do and eventually spiraled back into it. But I had a mentor that really spoke into my life, and he did so in a different way. So he not only called me out and called me to repentance, but he was like, you know what, brother, I'm going to walk through this with you, right? And he helped me realize that it wasn't just that I was this, horny pervert who couldn't control himself, right? He helped me understand there's a reason why you're doing this and why you keep doing it, when all logic says, you're going to lose everything, but you keep doing it. And so he helped me really understand that, and helped me break down that, there was something I was using this addiction for, right? I was trying to escape from something, trying to run away from something, or trying to find something, trying to fill a void, and really walked me through that. And I think that's one place where the church has really failed in that regard. They've rightfully called guys out for the sin, right, and called them to repentance, which we need to do. But we also need to show love and a path to repentance, right? Be like, yes, the guys know this is wrong. I knew this was wrong. Everybody knows, even if they do justify it, they know it's wrong, right? It's just deep down you do, right? they don't need to have the Bible thrown at them more. They don't need to be beaten over the head with how terrible they are and everything what they're doing and how much they're hurting their wife. They know all that. We know all that, right? But the emotional drive for this, the emotional urge to act out through this is so powerful that it almost puts a blinders onto those things. And so that's why guys that the wife gives them that ultimatum one more time and I'm leaving you, and he still goes and does it. You're like, what the hell? Why? Well, it's because this emotional need that they have is so strong, it's going to overpower any discipline, any willpower, any general rational thinking. And that's what had happened with me, why I always went back to it, because I needed it, right? And it wasn't that I needed the porn or I needed the sex necessarily. It was I needed that escape, right? And for me, that drug of choice became sexuality. And for others, it's alcohol or whatever. And so he really helped me understand and understand it from the deeper level versus just being a bad habit or just being a poor decision making or whatever, and said, hey, no, there's a reason you're doing this. We need to figure out what that reason is and then learn to heal that. So it's not just saying no to a temptation, right? It's healing yourself at the core so you don't even have that urge to act out anymore. You don't need it. That's right. That made all the difference for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, like the way I see it, it's really like escapism is driven by the pain of unmet desires. It's like, and if you don't know what those desires are, well, then you're not going to be able to ever get to the root of the problem, right? You're just going to keep, plugging it up with whatever the drug of choice is. And so if you're willing to share, like what did you think, like what did you discover? Like what was the big driver for you?
Yeah, so I recognized there was a lot of fears and a lot of rejection and a lot of fears of not being good enough, right? So I mentioned I was a pastor's son, and that was kind of my identity growing up, right? I have great parents, wonderful parents. The Lord couldn't have blessed me with better parents. I still have a great relationship with them, but in a way they were almost too good, right? My dad is this well-respected member of the community, pastor, everybody knows him. And I had to, anything I did, and a lot of pastors' kids struggle with this, reflected on him and his leadership.
Sure.
Right. And so I'm going through stuff just as a teenager, just normal teenage crap that teenagers go through. And it's being used for people to attack my dad and his leadership and his thing of the church. Right. And so I never felt like I could live up to my last name. Right. And I didn't have my own. I wasn't just me. I wasn't just Tim. I was, that's Pastor Regal's son.
Gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
Add into that some rejection. I had rejection from girls in my teenage years. And so that was a huge, huge thing. Right. So take that, for example. I learned that I could go to porn. I could go to sex. There was no fear of rejection. Right. I'm always good enough. I'm always strong enough. I'm always manly enough. I'm always wanted.
Right.
Right.
You get that virtual status
right.
that fills up that
right.
sense of inadequacy.
So when I feel inadequate, when I feel weak, powerless, not good enough, I can go to porn and it sells me that mirage, which it is a mirage, but it still sells you that feeling of being strong and being powerful when you feel weak and defeated. And that's what I got addicted to. Like it wasn't
sure. And I would say it's
sexuality.
It's even beyond just like the vision or the illusion. Like there's actually, I think, something neurochemically, like biological going on,
right.
specifically around that kind of emotional thing. Because as men, like we're just on that coarse physical level, like wired to equate sex with success. Right? Like if you just look at an animal in nature, it's like if it's getting laid, it's not going to want to change anything, right? It's like, hey, you're doing good. You're winning the reproductive game right now. And so it's like when you get that hit, it just relaxes your system. It kind of brings you home. You're affirmed on just like a level even outside of anything that just makes sense logically. It's just like this limbic reaction.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so much that's tied into it. I mean, it's an emotional thing. There's a spiritual aspect. There's a biological aspect as well. I mean, where your brain becomes addicted to it, right? And there's a lot of evidence that's coming out now in studies that are talking about that, about how the effect the brain has on it. Like they say, porn is just as addicting as a heroin addiction, right?
Sure.
Obviously, the physical consequences aren't as devastating, right? You're not going to overdose and die on porn. but the urge for it has become so powerful, and that's what I was dealing with. And so for me, I had to go back and heal those wounds and heal that pain, because even into my 30s, I was still dealing with it. So yeah, you know, I got dumped by some girl in high school. Who gives a shit? Who didn't? Right? You know,
Yeah.
but that fear of rejection stuck with me. So fast forward 10, 15 years, maybe my boss chews me out at work, right? Has nothing to do with sex, but my inside, I feel those same fears and those same insecurities and those same emotions, and I know how to deal with those. I deal with those by running away to porn and sex. So
Yeah.
so even
How much was
current
of like a
triggers are still affecting me in the same way that something did when I was a kid.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And like one of the things that I found to be like a big kind of like eye opener for a lot of guys when they go through my work is that they shift out of this mentality of like, oh, I'm just so horny, right? I'm just
Right.
you know, I just have such a high sex drive, and you start to realize like, no, that's not what it is. Like, you're not horny, you're not craving for sex so much as you are like you've trained your system to treat porn as the medicine, and any negative emotion that comes up, whether it's stress,
Correct.
insecurity, loneliness, etc., you've trained your brain to say, we treat this with porn. That's our medicine. So eventually it stops giving you the actual underlying emotion, right? You don't even feel stressed about that situation at work or that fight you got into with your spouse. You just feel I need to use porn.
Absolutely.
Right? And so what was that like for you to come to that realization? Like to see
That
this deeper stuff?
was changing for me. I mean, that's what made all the difference, right? Because it, first of all, it took the shame out of it, right? You know, so shame drives shame, right? And so you get into this vicious cycle where you have all this emotional pain and all these things you don't know how to deal with. So you go to porn to deal with it. Then you feel shame for going to porn, and then all those emotions build up, and those fears and anxieties build up from the shame and drives you to go back. So it's just this vicious cycle, right? And so understanding what was happening on the emotional level, on the biological level, on those sort of things, took that shame out of it, right? To where no, I'm not just this pervert that can't control himself. I'm not just this asshole who cheats on his wife. You know, it doesn't excuse any of those things that I did. It doesn't take away the responsibility for my own actions and my own sins. And I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression that I'm justifying anything here. But it helps understand them. And understanding our sin doesn't excuse our sin.
Of course,
but if we want
but
to,
it shifts things from a defeating the sin
Correct.
mentality to a healing
Right.
the pain driving
because,
the issue.
Yeah, the thing is, you just need to try harder. And then when you fail, you're like, well, I'm just not trying hard enough. I'll never be good enough, which just drives that shame and drives you further into it, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah, I see some guys, they'll get too hooked up, even just like on their day counter and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they'll use that like, oh, I lost my day counter. I'm not good enough now. Or, I peeked at a girl for too long, or I scrolled something too,
Right.
but I'm already not perfect. Now I got to go all the way
yeah,
with
it's
it.
like,
I just suck now.
It's like, I think there's I don't know if it's true or not, but there's a story of Martin Luther, you know, when he was going through all the Reformation, and that he confessed all his sin and did all his penance and did all that and felt proud for a moment because he had done all that. He's like, well, I got to go through it again because I felt proud, right? And so guys get this self-defeating mentality, and they focus on the loss so much. And that's one of the major things that I work with on guys. It's like, I don't care what your streak is. I want to know you're making progress, right? I want to know you're moving forward. Relapses are going to happen. Relapses are a part of recovery. They're not a failure of recovery, right? We don't want them, obviously, but it's going to happen, right? And I think anybody who's really dealt with anyone deeply, who's dealt with an addiction, whether it's porn addiction, alcohol, drugs, whatever, knows that relapses happen. You know, anybody that's coming and saying that if you relapse, you've failed completely doesn't understand addiction and has never dealt with it, right?
I only think that the only time a relapse is a failure is if you don't learn something from it, right?
Exactly.
Like, that's
right?
where like almost being too positive can be
Right.
a little counterproductive, because you'll see guys, oh, I failed, I'm just going to get back on the horse. It's
Right.
like, wait, pump the brakes. Let's see what we can learn from this.
Right.
What was that missing piece that you weren't aware of? What was that underlying
Yeah.
pain or desire?
And it's
that we had
hard
to
to get
surface?
guys to shift their mindset from that, right? Like you were saying, they're just like, oh, I'm just so horny. And like a guy, I'll work with a guy and he'd be like, hey, I messed up last night. And I was like, all right, well, let's retrace our steps here. What's going on? And he was like, well, I was just in bed and I got horny and I looked at porn and jerked off. Okay, well, let's retrace that a little bit. What had happened throughout the day? What were you doing? Well, it turns out he had a really stressful day at work, so he all these emotions were happening under the surface. He didn't even recognize it. So late at night, he just wants to zone out and just turn his brain off.
Yeah.
Right. So he's scrolling his phone, looking for whatever. Some Instagram hoe comes up. One thing leads to another, and then you're looking at porn. Well, it wasn't that you just got horny. It's like all those emotional things, all those fears came up from whatever had happened that day at work, and it snowballed until you got to this point. And so it's really hard for guys to get over that mindset of that, right? Of it, that it's just a failure, that you just weren't good enough, weren't strong enough. And it's really hard for the wives and partners to understand that. And I get that, right? Because there's so much hurt attached to it. But that made a huge difference for my wife in our recovery, was her understanding that I wasn't just this horny bastard, right? There was a reason I was going to it. And so, I don't focus on the streak, right? I focus on making progress. There's an analogy I use all the time. I say, if you drive 100 miles down the road and you blow a tire in your car, right? It sucks. You're pissed off. You're frustrated. You're annoyed. But you fix the tire and keep going, right? You don't have to go back to where you started and start all over again. You already traveled those 100 miles, right? And that's how it is with this. Like, you can go 2 weeks and have a relapse. You can be like, oh, I'm starting all over again. Well, that's just a defeatist and a shame-filled mindset, right? You can be like, you know what? No, I had 13 days of progress and went back one day, right?
Well,
and so
I would maybe push back a little against that, because, like, on one hand, that's true 100%, because those days you're living clean, you're practicing living clean,
right.
You're reinforcing that lifestyle, which is absolutely progress that does not just disappear.
Right.
But I would say that there is still a neurological healing, like beyond the deeper inner work, like the breakdown of those addictive chemicals. I think it's delta phos B, the thing that like builds up on that pathway. That part does get reset. So it's like,
right.
I think there needs to be some, like, it's kind of like in the middle. It's like, you don't lose it all, you lose something. So there is a cost here. We do want to build this streak, but we can't get too focused on that. We just got to know, all right, well, you're probably gonna be a little more triggered the next few days.
Yeah, exactly. And that often happens. That's how you end up with this binge and purge cycle that a lot of guys kind of go into. But where I come from with that is focusing on, hey, we want to shift our mindset from how many times we failed versus to how many times we're winning the battle, right?
Yeah.
So I say, using that same example, you go 2 weeks, okay, so you had 13 wins and 1 loss, right? I'm a baseball guy. That's a 928 batting average, right? And what I tell guys to focus on, I said, focus on that. Focus on your batting average, not your hitting streak, right? And yes, there is a biological, scientific reset that happens. But what I want them to be like, hey, I made 13 days. I can make however many days the next time, and keep building on that progress, and use that as stepping stones to keep gaining momentum. If you're constantly defeating yourself and you're mentally and physically starting over every time, it's a letdown every time, and then it does lead 100%. You into multiple relapses. But if
That's why I feel like there
if you
should
learn
be
from
like,
it and keep using that to build your momentum moving forward, and that just shifts that mindset out of that shame and into the progress.
Yeah. And, I come from like the coaching world where metrics and stuff are really harped on. And, when I first got onto the scene, it was like the NoFap subreddit, and it was all about your day counter, your streak. And I think there's value to that. It can give you focus, and there's a sense of accomplishment when you complete a 90-day reboot or whatever.
Right.
But I think a measurement that's not talked about enough in this is like frequency over a period of time. Like, if I have a guy and he's using porn, multiple times a day, and at the end of a month he's using it like he's doing that, like that's what he's been doing multiple times a day, and after working with me for a little while he's using it a few times a month, okay, he's still not having any crazy streak, but that's a massive amount of progress, and that's got to be acknowledged, because for some people it's going to be incredibly difficult to jump from regular usage to zero.
Yes.
And so like you have to be able to celebrate those wins along the way to reinforce the process, like you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really that progress over perfection is one of the biggest things that I focus on, and one of the hardest mental hurdles for guys to get over, because like you say, a guy like that from a couple times a day to a couple times a month, in his head, he's so used to just beating the crap out of himself for every little failure, right? And that it creates more failures. And so if you can shift your mindset to where you're celebrating those victories and that progress, yeah, again, progress over perfection, we acknowledge that and build on that and use that as a step forward versus a step back. The old adage, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, you're still moving forward, right? And that's what we're doing here.
Yeah. And so, like, what was your, what did you do? Like, what was the work that you were doing that allowed you to start putting this stuff behind you, like, just in a practical sense?
So, yeah, I always think there's 3 elements to it. And I've kind of curriculumized, if that makes sense, this now. But I kind of, in hindsight, I recognize what I was doing, right? And so the 3 things that I focus on in my coaching and what helped me was help, habits, and heart. I mean, it's easy as the 3 H's, right? So I needed the help, right? I needed somebody to teach me all this stuff, to not just tell me I was a terrible person, but be like, hey, I'm going to help you through this. I'm going to help you understand this. And so there was a lot of that work there, that help, that accountability, right? You can't go through this alone. So for me, it was having that guy by my side that I could be accountable to, could check in with, could teach me things, guide me. The second is habits, which I know we've said all along, this isn't just a bad habit, it's deeper than that, but there are still boundaries and practical, logistical barriers that we have to set up to protect ourselves, right?
Sure.
So I had to understand where my triggers were. I had to understand what my most vulnerable times were. A lot of guys are very ritualistic with their porn addiction, right? It's the same time of day, same scenario, whatever, so I had to build different routines. Like for me, it was a lot of times it was late at night. My wife and kids were in bed. I'd be downstairs watching a hockey game or something on TV, scrolling my phone, one thing is to another. So I had to completely redo that routine in order to take away that vulnerability. Same thing, I use Covenant Eyes. It's not the be all end all, but it's a tool, right? And so we have to understand those practical logistical things as well and kind of set those boundaries. I always use the analogy of a guardrail, right? So if you're driving down the road and you're alongside a cliff, it isn't just a road and the cliff, right? There's a guardrail, then there's a little rumble strip on the shoulder, and then there's the white line, and then there's the lane you're supposed to be in. Well, you don't want to have to hit that guardrail, right? You want to hit that little rumble strip and be like, oh crap, and get back on the road. And so we kind of have to set those type of barriers up in our lives to protect ourselves too, that multi-level barrier, boundary, whatever it is that we have to set up. So there was a lot of that too. And a lot of that in turn helped rebuild trust with my wife, right? Was knowing that those safeguards were in place. And the last thing was the heart, was all that emotional stuff. So he helped me go back and understand where these wounds came from, right? Where there's singular events that happened in my life. I talk about that rejection from a girl when I was in high school. That was a singular event. Other things were broader. Like I said, growing up as a PK and not really understanding who I was or ever feeling good enough or ever feeling like I could live up to my last name helped me understand that, helped me heal that through kind of learning how to deal with those things emotionally, spiritually, being able to kind of lay some of those burdens down at the cross and dealing with them in a healthy way. And then I learned how to deal when those feelings come up now, how to recognize them now, what my triggers are currently, and then learning how to manage those in the moment. So when something comes up, like I said earlier, my boss rips me a new one at work, I used to fall back into that rejection mindset and then escape. Well, now I learned how to deal with that, how to recognize what was happening in the moment. And instead of having that knee-jerk emotional reaction to a trigger, I could slow that down and learn to have a rational response and not let my emotions, not let my fears and anxieties steer the ship, and be able to deal with those in the moment. And that made all the difference, right? So I was able to deal with those things and heal them on a emotional level, on a spiritual level. And that's what allowed me to heal and move forward to where, again, I wasn't just resisting an urge or wasn't just, saying no to a temptation or feeling like I was just turning off my horniness and sexuality. It was like, no, I learned to heal with those things so I didn't have those insane urges that drove me to act out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's very similar. There's a bunch of different modalities for how to approach this, but like in general, it's like what you're saying. It's like, yeah, there's a certain amount of work that needs to be done just specifically on the porn habit, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, understand your triggers, set up your guardrails. Like, I use the porn filter as a speed bump.
Right.
Like, you don't want to be able to just do it on autopilot, right? Like,
Right.
So yeah, set that stuff up. But then there's just this inner work, this more holistic kind of thing that needs to happen where, like, the way I look at it is you got to start creating a life that you don't want to escape from.
Yeah.
And that's practical. Like, all right, what are the big things in your life that just hurt you, create pain, make you want to escape? But then also, what are the things that are going on in your head that are making you want to escape? Well, what's that asshole in between your ears making you feel, and how are we going to shift that? And
Right.
at the end of the day, if you can be present with yourself, you can connect with yourself, you can live from a place of dignity rather than, conditional self-worth that's constantly on a roller coaster, you're going to be able to start making real progress.
Right.
And so, it sounds like we're very much on a similar page with all of this. And I'm curious, like, so you've gone through this transformation. What's different now, like in your life and in your marriage?
Well, I mean, it's to the point where I can deal with things and know how to manage these sort of things in my life. When these emotions comes up, fears, anxieties, when these triggers come up, I can face them. I can deal with them, right? I have the tools now, and I have the understanding, and have done the work that they don't drive me to act out anymore. That I just can deal with them, right? And so that's freed me, and then not having the chains, if you will, of addiction around me has allowed me to improve other areas of my life. And that's the biggest thing about this is it's the most dangerous thing about porn addiction isn't watching porn, right? The most dangerous thing is what being addicted to porn prevents you from being, right? Because I'm proud of what I overcame, right?
Sure.
But at the same time, I just got back to square one, right? I just stopped something and never should have been done in the first place, right? But what stopping that did was allowed me to move up, right? So I was able to heal the marriage and become the husband that I always needed to be, right? And be that head of my household like Christ is the head of the church. I was never that before when I was addicted to porn.
Sure.
It allowed me to be a better father. It allowed me to be a better leader in community and church and all of those things. So it freed me to do all those things that I would have never had the freedom to do when I was in the addiction. So now everything in my life has gotten better. I'm a better husband, better father. I'm in better physical shape, better mental health shape. I'm been able to improve almost every area of my life by not having this holding me back. And that's made the biggest difference. And it took a lot of work to heal our marriage. Right? A lot of marriages don't survive this, but praise the Lord, we were able to put the work in. I was able to do the work on myself. She was able to do the work herself, and we were able to heal the marriage. And in fact, we renewed our wedding vows after we did all this. Right?
That's awesome.
As a way of just recommitting our marriage to God and reconfirming that. And so, and the crazy thing about it that a lot of people can't believe is all through this, after my recovery, my wife and I never went to marriage counseling. Not once. Right? Because, and that's a mistake a lot of people make, a lot of couples make, is they find out a guy's watching porn, they immediately go to marriage counseling. Right? And like you mentioned in the beginning, it's a lot of female counselors, which doesn't really help the guy. There's a lot of woke crap and all that sort of stuff, which is, that's a different podcast. But, you can't fix a marriage if you don't fix the people in the marriage, right? And so when I did the work on myself to heal and become the man I needed to be, she did the work on herself that she needed to do to heal. We didn't need the marriage counseling because we were able to come together and have our marriage be what it was always meant to be. And so, our marriage, we'll be married here 17 years in August, and our marriage is stronger than it's ever been. We just spent a week in the mountains by ourselves and went away for a week, just the two of us. And our marriage is better than it's ever been. And we've overcome things that the vast majority of marriages wouldn't survive, and people were telling her to leave all throughout it, and thankfully the Lord spoke into her heart and gave her the strength to stick it out, because now our marriage is amazing.
Yeah, and I think there's something beautiful in that. And I think, you know, that there's testament to your wife's character that she stuck all this out, and a testament to your character to overcome it. But I think in like if we're gonna try and draw a silver lining from this really corrupt culture that we live in, like sexually speaking, is that the people who travel through that and make it to the other side, there's a level of, I don't even know how to describe it, just a level of goodness that you would not have been able to unlock without that challenge,
Sure.
right? Like, you know, I don't think I would be the man that I am today if I didn't go through my porn addiction and my issues like that, right? Like in the same way, like, you know, my marriage with my wife, if we didn't go through this kind of stuff together, if you didn't go through that, like, there is, for
Right.
whatever hardship you go through, there is a greater good waiting for you on the other side if you stick with it and you persevere.
Yeah, right. And I mean, that's the, you know, the refining fire that Scripture talks about, right? And that's where we learn to trust in God, right? I mean, it's easy to trust in God when everything's going great, right? And sometimes, you know, God creates, you know, allows these challenges to happen in our lives, not to punish us or to hurt us, but because He wants us to learn to trust in Him.
100%.
And so that was one of the major things that I've learned throughout all this was how to trust in God and not try to fix everything myself and feel like all this weight was on my own shoulders, and then I get overwhelmed and all these fears would come up and then I go to porn to escape it, right? But if I learned that I could lay those burdens down, that I could confess those things, and that I could rely on His strength and learn to have a real faith, and learn to trust in Him versus just having faith of, oh yeah, I believe in God, right? It's that real faith in action versus just faith and belief. And so having that is what brought me through this.
Yeah, I'm curious if you had an experience like this. This is how it was for me, and I've seen other guys reach this as well. Is like when I really quit porn, like, and it felt like I was standing up on the edge of a cliff, and like, because I had used, you know, I got everything about me was like, well, I need to have this sexual stimulation, like that's my everything, and the thought of letting it go felt like I was going to be jumping off a cliff, and like I was probably just going to be crashed and, you know, dashed into a million pieces.
Yeah.
And like that faith of believing like, well, maybe I won't.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe like God will take care of me. Maybe things will be okay. And like being able to have that was where I felt faith more than anything ever before.
Yeah, it's
and I'm curious if you had a similar kind of thing.
It's the faith of not having porn as a safety net. As weird as that sounds, right?
Yeah.
It's like I always knew this was there as a cope, right? That this
Right.
coping mechanism was always there. No matter what, I could go to that and escape whatever I was dealing with. And so there's a fear of, if you don't have that safety net, right? How am I going to deal with all this stuff? Because I don't know how to deal with it without porn.
Right.
Right. And that's what made the difference, was having the faith that I can get through this, and then learning how to deal with it without porn. You know, those were the two biggest factors, I think.
Right. And it's scary for guys depending on their situation. Like say you're a single guy, okay? You give up porn. Well, there's no guarantee you're going to find that woman, right? It's like, well, what's that mean? I'm going to live a life of celibacy? It's like, that's a terrifying thought for, if you're a guy who's addicted to porn, that's almost like a death to consider that.
Exactly.
Or even if you just have you're married, but it's bad, you know, you got a dead bedroom. It's like, well, I don't know if this is going to fix. I don't know if I can repair things. It's like stepping into that unknown. Like that's where it's like you feel like you're about to fall off a cliff, but that's where, you know, if your faith is strong, that's where God will let you start walking on water, as it were, right? If you can just like follow a process, like trust, believe that it can get better, because without the hope, you got no hope.
Yeah. There's I can't remember who said it, but there's you know, hope is hoping when everything seems hopeless.
Yeah,
you know?
pretty much, right?
And that's what it takes. And that's that faith and that trust in God, in yourself, and who's ever mentoring you, and kind of being able to you know, give up that, I don't know if control is the right word, but kind of give up that safety and that whatever it is that we have to surrender in order to truly find the freedom.
Well, I think it is a control. I think like what it is it's a pleasure button, right? Yeah. And if you don't have that pleasure button under your thumb anymore, then it's like you got to find some other way to generate pleasure. Mm-hmm. And that's a little trickier, yeah. Right? Because you got to start figuring out, well, where do I enjoy my life? And a lot of guys, when they quit porn, like, and they're going through my program, they realize I have no idea how to have fun. Mm-hmm. I don't know what I like to do, because they just usually are workaholics, or they are basically people who feel like they should be workaholics and are not. And then they just unplug. And so there's no cadence of work, rest, recover, enjoy, work. Like there's no balance to the life. Yeah. And so it's like you take the crutch of porn out, all of a sudden you see there's these big holes in how you live.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and it's that fear of that, and that keeps guys, they kind of always need that, break glass in an emergency,
sure,
thing there. And so that's what keeps a lot of guys from fully committing and fully overcoming.
100%. So I want to switch gears here and ask you some more specific questions.
Sure.
So I'm curious, like from your perspective, do you see a difference between like a porn addiction and a sex addiction? Because I was never really, a sex addict in terms of like, a bunch of anonymous partners and things like that. Mm-hmm. I've had, that wasn't where it was for me mostly. And so what do you think? Like, do they need to be approached differently, or are they basically the same?
Yes and no, right? I think it's a escalation and intensifying of the same root cause, right? So for me, it was a clear escalation, right? Mm-hmm. I didn't, and this is most guys, they don't go from just porn to sleeping with escorts, right? Sure. There's porn, then more hardcore porn, and then it gets in the chat rooms or texting or whatever, and eventually mm-hmm. It's a clear escalation. So in that way, it is the same, and it's the same root cause, right? It just escalated out of control. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it brings up a different treatment of it, right? Because there's deeper wounds there, and then there's also more aggressive things that we have to do to protect ourselves, right? Instead of just, when we're talking about the logistic and the practical type of things, the habitual things, with porn, it's a little bit simpler, right? Mm-hmm. You can control access, you can deal with triggers. Well, if you're going out and having random Tinder hookups or paying for escorts or going to massage parlors or whatever, right? There's going to be a more intense level to that. So
sure.
And then the pain that it causes is deeper, right? The pain that it's going to cause to your wife is a lot deeper if there's things happening physically versus just porn.
It's also riskier.
It's also riskier. You get I mean, not even just the obvious STD type of stuff, but there's different risks that are involved with that. But the thrill is also higher too.
Sure.
And that's what attracted me to a lot of it. So they are and they aren't, right? And speaking from a biblical standpoint, I think the healing process is a lot different, right? I don't, and I'm curious to hear your opinion on this. I think that Matthew 5:25 to 27, whatever it is one of the most misinterpreted passages of Scripture. I don't believe that porn addiction is adultery, right? I think the sin is there. Christ says it's committed adultery in your heart. That means your heart is mm-hmm. there. Your heart is capable of that sin, but yet you still haven't committed the act. So sure. Take that along its natural course. What is the ultimate thing there? Well, the ultimate thing is porn addiction justification for divorce. And I don't believe that, especially repentant porn addiction, is justification for divorce. So, but adultery, physical adultery, the Bible clearly states that is justification for divorce. It doesn't mean divorce has to take place, right? So when you get into that, where a man's just watching porn versus where he's actually physically having sex with somebody who's not his wife, that's a completely different process of healing that marriage versus some guys
Sure.
just jerking off to porn at midnight when everybody's asleep, right? So in that way, the stakes are so much higher, and there's so much more deeper healing that has to take place, and the potential for that the marriage doesn't survive, and biblically marriage doesn't survive, and or not. And so that's a whole other rabbit trail we could go down.
Sure.
But my point in all that is it makes a huge difference in how the marriage is healed as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, there's a there's a difference, particularly in the relationship level, with that. And I would say that there is even a third vector. Like, if we've got porn addiction, we've got anonymous sex. There's also kind of like more of like the love addict side of things, where I see guys fall into that, where they're not so much about looking for one night hookups.
Right.
They want to keep falling in love. They're addicted to that infatuation phase.
Yeah.
And, that usually gets fed through, a lot of sexting, a lot of, constantly trying to like go head over heels with someone, and they give you go, get obsessed with them. And then obviously it ends because it's dysfunctional. And
Right.
so like all of these things, there's generalities in them, right? Like, but because like at the core, it's kind of the same stuff, but the actual mechanics for like what you would specifically need to do, they just need to be tweaked depending upon what you're dealing with.
Right.
Pretty much.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's all, every situation is unique, right? There's
Right.
no, single thing that you can do for each individual person. Yeah. Someone, and that's why to me, it all comes down to the spiritual and emotional level, right? Because for me, it wasn't that infatuation thing. For me, it was just the sex, the physical act. Like,
Right.
It was almost always a one-night stand. I rarely ever knew the person's name, if it was a real name. It was all about the sexual act. Like, I never had that emotional connection. I never had that thing where I was going to leave my wife for the secretary, right? There was never that relational, emotional aspect of it. It was all purely sex. So that had to be dealt with on a different level than if somebody is like maybe saying they haven't even had sex with someone, but they're having an emotional affair with someone, right?
Right.
And it's all, so how that is treated and how you heal that are completely different things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree 100%. So one other thing I wanted to talk to you about is this idea of male sexual purity, because I see this as like a big missing point in Christians today. Is like we haven't done a good job of constructing an appealing vision of male sexual purity. Like for me, it's like thinking about the chastity speaker who came to my school, and it just like feels like so lame and just like disconnected from like any kind of thing that has to do with testosterone.
Yeah.
Really? And so I'm curious, what do you think of that? Like, what do you think of this idea of male sexual purity, and like what the church can do to make it seem like an appropriate ideal, rather than something like Christians are pretty good at saying, women's got to be sexually pure and stuff like that. But when it comes to men, it's like, you should be too, but like, we still want to be the boss. We still,
Well, I think that's a symptom of a larger issue in the church, which is there isn't strong masculinity in the church, right? The church isn't teaching you how to be a strong Christian, godly man, right? And what that, just in general, what a Christian man looks like, nobody wants to be like, right? Walk into a church and look around and be like, is there anybody here that inspires me? That's why these guys like Andrew Tate and David Goggins and all these other people are so enticing, even to Christians, because they're like, I want to be like that guy. That guy's badass, right?
Right.
And there isn't that in the church, right? We've so minimized that and just seen this compassionate, loving, forgiving Jesus, which is true. He's the lamb, but he's also the lion. And the church has done a terrible job of showing Jesus was a badass. Like, the dude went in the desert for 40 days with God knows what and survived, right? He fought the powers that be. He was the rebel, like in all the movies, where the small guy that is the rebellion and fights the big powers of evil, right? Jesus was that, right? But we've so feminized the church and so taken away that strength that there isn't anything that men want to be like. And one of the results of that is the sexuality thing too. They're like, it's I'm a dude. I'm a red-blooded American man. I want to go out and and do all these things. And it's so you seem like kind of a square nerd if you're just saving yourself for that. And so I think we need to do a better job of just portraying what masculinity is in the church, and a major part of that is sexuality. And so we need to have those conversations, and men need to be. We need to find those examples. We need to have those type of men that are portraying what it is. And I think another part of it is we've accepted this as a cultural, and then it in turn has become accepted in the church, that it's okay to, and not that it's not okay. Let me put it this way. Men weren't designed to wait until 32 to get married. Right? Men were designed to become of age and have this thing where they became a man, and then they started a family, right? And so now you're asking men to go 15 years after puberty without having sex? Good frickin' luck, right? Yeah. Men are designed to get, God kind of designed it that we get married young and start families, right? And then you don't have a lot of those issues. And then the other thing is, the whole dating scene, that you date somebody for 5 or 6 years before you get married. And again, you're supposed to show all aspects of a marriage relationship but not have the sex. So if you're dating this girl for 4 or 5 years, you're supposed to be leading her and doing all this and doing all the things that a husband does, but you're not supposed to have sex. Again, good luck. Yeah. Right? And so I think all those things come together, and where the cards are stacked against, the deck is stacked against men in that way, and so it just makes it so easy to step out of that and into the porn stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, those are all like, very big things, and there's not like really easy answers to them. And I would say there's even another layer to it probably, which is, I don't know if this is a conscious conspiracy, but I definitely think that it plays a role, is that if we were really going to like I think it's going to be on the laity, it's going to be on people like you and me to really promote strong masculinity, because I think, at least in general, because strong masculinity demands competence in our leadership. And so I think a lot of times it's easier for a pastor or a priest or whatever to promote a more feminized religion, because it's a more compliant one, generally speaking. It's not one that's going to challenge him and force him to do better. And so, like, I think that's also another big piece of it, is that, like, if like, imagine if all the Christian men in the world, that aren't really connected to the church because it doesn't feel like it speaks to them, doesn't feel like it's made for them, if they got really interested in the church, things would have to change.
Well, yeah.
It would have to. And that'd be a threat to, like,
and they have the courage to stand up against the voices that are going to bitch about it, right?
Right.
And I can tell you, those, even if you had a pastor who was strong enough to do that, he would get so much pushback from the female side of his congregation, right? And I've seen that. Trust me, I grew up in a pastor's home. I know the church political bullshit, and there's a lot, right? And it drives a lot of good people who would promote this type of thing out of the ministry. I've seen that happen a million times, because they're trying to do the right thing, and there's just such a political structure within the church that prevents it. It's the same thing that happens in government, right? There's people, there's good people who could make good change, but there's this system in place that keeps it from happening. And I think the same thing is happening in the church. And
I agree.
We have to have the faith and the courage to overcome that. You may have to have the faith to, if you want to fix a church that half the church leaves and you have a church split, and you have faith that you're doing the right thing. You might be the opposite of that. And this happened to me, where we had to have the faith to, okay, we can't do this. We're going to go start our own church. Right. And so you have to have the faith to do that. And that's scary as hell. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but that's what it takes. And a lot of people don't have the strength or the courage or the faith to do that.
Yeah, it's a little different in the Catholic Church, because obviously we've got, a very rigid hierarchical structure. But it's weird in a different sense, because the priests are all, unmarried. And so there's like a somewhat of a disconnect from, general
Sure.
masculinity of a father. And so it's like on either end of it, it's like we wouldn't be, Catholics wouldn't be like, oh, we can't go start our own church.
Right.
But there has to be, I think, an insistence from men, like a confident, like God-led insistence to make things better, to be able to just speak. Like there's a great book that's called The Silence of Adam. Mm-hmm. And it says like the fundamental failing of men in the fall of man was Adam didn't speak up.
Correct.
He didn't say, hey, no, we can't do this. This has to change. And I think we're kind of on the verge of like a big shift in the Christian sphere. Like, masculinity in a sense has been rising for a while. You can see it on the political spectrum, with Trump getting reelected. There's something that's happening. And there's a lot of people returning to the church. And a lot of these guys are men. And like, we have to come back and speak the truth. Be brave enough to stand against the pushback. Like I believe that women play an incredibly important role in the church.
Yeah.
But so clearly do men.
Yeah.
Own that.
Yeah.
Own that. And if you don't, then we're gonna have a lopsided structure that is not going to thrive.
Yeah. Yeah. The problem is, there's roles for women in the church, there's roles for men in the church. The problem is they're playing the wrong roles. Right? Now, the Catholic Church doesn't have the problem that the Protestant Church has with female pastors, but we have women playing the masculine role and men playing the feminine role, right? And I think that's where a lot of the damage has been done.
Right, and that's what's always going to be at the heart of this stuff. It's like when like people talk, like there was this big thing, like when I was getting into self-development, when I was like in my late teens and stuff like that, there was a lot of stuff about you got to get in touch with your feminine side. And like this whole thing has, I think, killed self-development for men, because I think men and women, we level up differently spiritually and like in terms of our personal competence and stuff like that. We're just wired differently. And this very soft, go to therapy, like get on, like whatever, like that side that might work really well for women, it doesn't necessarily work well for men. I think quitting porn for most guys is going to be a much more fruitful crucible for personal activation than just making sure that you're going to therapy every week and things like that, right? Like go do some hard stuff.
I think it's this thing where you need to go to therapy. Most men don't need therapy, right? Therapy and I shouldn't say that. They don't need what therapy and counseling has become in 2025. Right?
Yes, there is good therapy. I'm not saying, and there is a place for it for certain people, particularly if you got to process trauma. You got to have a space for that.
I think brotherhood is our therapy.
In a lot of cases,
and there's a huge lack of that, and that's something that I have in my life with good men, both locally and online. I wrote my brother Jerry Adams and I wrote this book, Men of Grit, where that's kind of our thing. It's like, hey, you need brotherhood, you need Christian fellowship, and most Christian men's groups are laughable, right? And so we need that thing, where you go do something hard together. The group that I'm a part of, we get together 2-3 times a year at meetups and retreats, and we go do some hard shit, right?
Yeah.
And have that, because that's how men build, and that's how men grow, by doing things together. You see the bond that men have after war. Right, you see the bond that men who have gone through a tragic event or something together. Men build by doing together, and so they don't need to go into some counselor's office and cry it out. Right, they need to get together with other men and go and fight battles together. And that's what I think is really needed. And I think the more we get that, the more we'll see the effects of that come into the church.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think like. I just did a reaction video on YouTube about this sex therapist. She was talking about how, all sexual things are downstream from social interaction. So like our sexual atrophy we see today, like the decline in marriage, the decline in sex, the decline in birth rates, like all that's downstream from social atrophy. Like we're losing these connections. And I think that's absolutely true. It's like if you want to get your sexuality on point, you want to get your romantic relationships on point, get your friendship some point with other men first, you know, like.
Well, yeah, and that's something that's happened in the church, that's happened in society, is the seen as male friendships as being unnecessary, right? Or at unnecessary at best, at worst, it's gay, right? I mean, we laugh, but it's true. Like, if there's two guys that are close brothers and good friendships, they're gonna make gay jokes about them, right? It's minimized. We call it a bromance. Like, that was a term a couple of years ago. Remember that? Like,
yeah,
you know, and it's almost made a mockery of. You know, everybody, the society assumes David and Jonathan were gay, right? Because our modern society can't understand two men having that intimate of a relationship and it not being sexual, because we've sexualized everything.
right.
But that's exactly what men need, is that brotherhood. They need that guy time. And there's a whole bunch of things that have gone into it, but that if you're not spending time with your wife 100% of the time, you're not prioritizing that relationship. And it's like, no, me spending time with with the boys, right, is making my marriage better. It's making me a better man so I can be a better husband and be a better father. And a lot of men feel guilty about doing that. They feel guilty about going and spending time with their guys because they're not spending time or money with their family. But that time with the guys is making them a better husband and a better father.
Yeah, it's our generation. I'm 35, so I'm pretty close to you. It's like we've gone through a social upheaval that I don't think's ever really been done in society. It's like, on one hand, we had like the sexual revolution that introduced like birth control, which fundamentally changed gender dynamics,
right?
Because then you could have casual sex.
Yep.
Then we've got, so that was like the part of it. Take feminism that arose from that, okay, and then that reaches a peak around when the time high-speed internet exists. We both grew up where our parents didn't know what the heck that was, so we had access to the internet.
Yeah.
Like, we were hooked on this crap from like as soon as our brains like started to mature, and then like, you know, things have just spiraled from there. So it's like, you know, men don't have men's spaces anymore. It's like, but they always did. They always did. Like, there was like we're kind of like this weird experiment in human nature, and it's people are getting screwed up. So it's like, I guess what I want to say is, like, guys, if you're struggling out there, it makes sense. You're dealing with a very unnatural world in just a very logical sense from like what men have done toward what we're expected to do now. Like, it's insane. It's like we have to now be so much older to get married. It's so much harder to provide for a family.
Yes.
It's like everything about being a man is harder. And I would also argue it's just same thing's true for women. I think it's way harder to be a woman in a lot of ways too, especially a happy married, you know, mother. And so shit's hard, but things can get better. Right? Like, you can get help, things can improve. I see it like day in and day out with the guys that I work with.
Me too.
And so, Tim, like, where can people find you?
Best place to find me is online. Social media, I'm biggest on Instagram and Twitter. My name's there. It's just my name, Timothy Regal. You can go to timothyregal.com. My one-on-one coaching program, it's called the Warrior 40 program, Battle Plan for Sexual Integrity. You can find all that information on my website. I have my new book that my brother Jerry and I just released, Men of Grit into the Wilderness. It's a 40-day challenge for men to renew their faith, restore their masculinity, and re-energize their family. So you can find me in all those places and reach out and let's talk and get you where you need to be and become the godly man that God created you to be.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on. It's been really great chatting with you. If anyone wants to check out my stuff a little bit more, I also help guys quit porn. I actually have a training below where you can learn the same 5-minute journaling technique that I use for guys to help them reprogram their brain to automatically crush their cravings. You just grab that by clicking the link below. But thank you, Timothy, for being here. It was really great chatting with you. We'll have to do this again soon sometime.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate it.